Welcome to week 2 of Practical Bayesian Methods. I'm Alexander Novikov, and this week we're going to cover latent variable models. So what is a latent variable, why do we need them, and how to apply them to real problems. And the second topic for this week is the expectation maximization algorithm, which is the key topic of our course. And this is a method to train latent variable models. We will see numerous extensions of this expectation maximization algorithm in the following weeks. So let's get started with latent variable models. Latent variable is just a random variable which is unobservable to you, nor in training nor in test phase. So latent is just hidden from Latin, and as an example of those you can think, so for example, some phenomena like height or length or maybe speed can measure directly, and some others cannot. For example, intelligence or altruism. You can't just measure altruism with some quantitative scale. And so these variables are usually called latent. And to motivate why do they need to introduce this concept into probabilistic modeling, let's consider the following example. Say you have an IT company and you want to hire an employee. So you have a bunch of candidates, and for each candidate you have some data on them. So for example, for all of them you have their average high school grades, for some of them you have their university grades, and maybe some of them took IQ tests and stuff like that. And you also conducted a phone screening interview. So your HR manager called each of them and asked them a bunch of simple questions to make sure that they understand what your company is about. Now you want to bring these people on site to make an actual technical interview. But the problem is that you have too many candidates. You can't invite all of them because it's expensive. You have to pay for their flights, for their hotels and stuff like that. So natural idea arises. Let's predict the on-site interview performance for each of them and bring only those who are predicted to be good enough, so who are predicted to be a good fit for our company. Well, if you're in the business for a while, you may have some historical data. So for a bunch of other people, you can know their features, like their grades and their IQ scores, and you know their on-site performance, because you have already conducted these interviews. Now you have a standard regression problem. You have a training data set of historical data, and for new people you want to predict their on-site performance, and you want to bring on the on-site interview only those whose predicted on-site performance is good. However, there are two main problems why we can't apply here the standard regression methods from machine learning. So first of all, we have missing values. For example, we don't know university grades for all of them because Jack didn't attend university. And it doesn't mean that he is not a good fit for your company. Maybe he is, but he just never bothered to attend one. So we don't want to ignore Jack, but we want to anyway predict for him some meaningful on-site interview performance score. And the second reason why we don't want to use some standard regression methods like linear regression or neural networks is that we may want to quantify uncertainty in our predictions. So imagine that for some people, we may predict that their performance is really good, and we certainly want to bring them on site and maybe even want to hire them right away. But for others, the predicted performance is not good. And for someone, the predicted performance can be, for example, 50, which may mean that this person is not a good fit for your company. But it may also mean that we are just not sure about him. So we don't know anything about him. And you ask the algorithm to predict his performance. And he returned you some number, but it doesn't mean anything. So in this case, we may want to quantify the uncertainty of the algorithm in the predictions. So if the algorithm is quite sure that this person will perform at the level of 50 out of 100, for example, then we may not want to bring him on site. On the other hand, if some other guy predicted performance is also 50, but we're really uncertain about his performance, then we may want to bring him anyway and see, maybe we just don't know anything about him. So he may be good after all. And the reason for this uncertainty may be, for example, that he has lots of missing values, or maybe his data is a little bit contradictory, or maybe our algorithms just aren't used to see people like that. So these two reasons, having missing values and wanting to quantify uncertainty, bring us to the needs of probabilistic modeling of the data. And as we discussed in week one of the usual way to handle to build probabilistic models is to start with drawing some random variables and then understanding what are the connections between these random variables. So which random variables correlate with each other in some way. And in this particular case, it looks like everything is connected to everything. Like if a person's university grades are high, it directly influences our beliefs about his high school grades or his IQ score. And this is true for any pair of variables here. And the situation where we have all possible ages, like everything is connected to everything, means that we fail to capture the structure of our probabilistic model. So we end up with the most flexible and the least structured model we can possibly have. And in this situation, we have to assume, so to build a probabilistic model of our data now, we have to assign probability to each possible combination of our features. So there are exponentially many combinations of different university grades, different IQ scores and stuff like that. And for each of them, we have to assign a probability. And this tables of probability has billions of entries, and it's just impractical to treat it as parameters, to treat these probabilities as parameters. So we have to do something else, but we always can assume some parametric model, right? We can say that we have these five random variables, and that probability for any combination of them is some simple function, for example, exponent of a linear function, divided by normalization constant. In this case, you reduce your model complexity by a lot. Now we have just like 5 parameters which we want to train. But the problem here is with the normalization constant. So to normalize this thing, so it will be a proper probability and it will sum up to 1, we have to consider the normalization constant, which is the sum of all possible configurations. And this is a gigantic sum. We have to consider all billions of possible configurations to compute it. And this means that the training and inference will be impractical. So what else can we do here? Well, it turns out that you can introduce a new variable which you don't actually have in your model of the world, which is called intelligence. So you can assume that each person has some internal and hidden property of him, which we'll call intelligence, and for example measure on the scale from 1 to 100. And this intelligence directly causes each of these IQ scores and university grades and stuff like that. Of course, this connection is not deterministic, so an intelligent person can have a bad day and write tests poorly, but this is direct causation, so intelligence directly causes all these observations. And if we assume such a model, then we reduce the model complexity by a lot. We erased lots of ages. And now our model is much simpler to work with. So now we can rewrite our probabilistic model by using the rule of sum of probabilities. It's a sum of all possible configurations given the intelligence times the prior probability. And this conditional probability factorizes into a product of small probabilities because of the structure of our model. So now instead of one huge table with all the combinations for 5 different features, we have just 5 small tables that assigns probability to each to a pair of like IQ score given intelligence. This means that we were able to reduce the model complexity without reducing the flexibility of the model. So, to summarize, introducing latent variables may simplify our model, so it can reduce the number of ages we have. And as a consequence of that, we can reduce the number of parameters. And another positive feature of latent variables is that they're sometimes interpretable. So, for example, this intelligence variable, for a new person, we can estimate his intelligence on the scale from 1 to 100. And for example, it can be 80. What does that mean? Well, it's not obvious because you don't know what this scale means. And you're not even sure that this intelligence means actual intelligence, because I never told your model that this variable should be intelligence. You just said that there should be some variable here. But anyway, this variable can be interpretable, and you can compare intelligence according to this scale of different people in your dataset. And some downside of latent variable models is that they can be harder to work with. So to train a latent variable model, you have to rely on a lot of math, and this math is what this week is all about. So in the next videos, we will discuss methods for training latent variable models.